From filmmaker Jeff Burr comes the second sequel of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, and the first to not be helmed by Tobe Hooper himself. An entry extremely divisive among the Chainsaw fanbase, and one that boasted a production so troublesome that Jeff Burr himself demanded his own name be taken off the film, which obviously didn't happen, but nonetheless, an infamous film for an array of infamous reasons, and it's the 1990 Chainsaw film that ushered in the highly debated New Line Cinema era of the franchise, Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre III. Unlike the first two entries of the series, Chainsaw 3 is not a film I would consider ingrained in me, not something that's burned into the very DNA of my being. I saw this film several years later in comparison to the first two. I don't think I saw this till 95 or 96, which is weird to think about now, considering how much I loved those first two films, and how often I saw the VHS of this movie on shelves back in the day. That gnarled, long-haired Leatherface, barely lit by pinks, reds, and blues, adorned with a diagonal chainsaw, and in big, bold red letters, Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre III. For some reason, it just took me a long time to rent this movie. Not because I wasn't interested, not because the cover of the VHS freaked me out, but I guess because if I was renting a Chainsaw movie, it was either the first or second film, and since I had no experience with this one yet, I guess I really just didn't care. When I finally did rent the film, however, I became an immediate fan. Right from the start, the film has an angrier tone than the first two films, and is executed in a more straightforward horror movie style than the first sequel, but also seems more streamlined and polished and Hollywood than the original, and never really tries to return to that scarier, more realistic, documentary-like style, for better or for worse. I personally would have loved to see a return to the gritty, raw nature of the original, but we got what we got, and I was happy with how Leatherface turned out, considering. It definitely feels like an early 90s New Line Cinema film, take that as you will. The story begins with a recently uncovered dumping ground in Texas, where dozens and dozens of human corpses, or pieces of corpses I should say, have been uncovered by the authorities. After a brief appearance by none other than Stretch herself, we quickly meet our main characters, new final girl Michelle, played by Kate Hodge, and her boyfriend Ryan, played by William Butler, who are driving across country in order to deliver the vehicle to her father in Florida. They're told by police to
keep moving, don't stop for nothing or nobody.
And we're soon on our way into the meat and potatoes of this new story. Now, I think Ryan and Michelle technically are on a break by the time we meet them in the story, so I guess it's sort of up in the air if they're really together as a couple or not, so to speak. But Ryan's at least along for the trip, and you know what they say, somebody's gotta finish off the armadillo when nobody else will. So far, we have a very deliciously ominous ambiance about the film. Very moody, very serious, very dark, and once the film switches over to the daylight of the following morning, we catch a great glimpse of the surrounding California countryside, doubling for Texas for the very first time in the franchise, as this is the first film in the franchise to not film in Texas, for better or worse. I mean, look at those hills. I guess it could pass for Texas, right? Nonetheless, a dry Texas desert in the middle of absolutely nowhere, just as a Chainsaw movie should be. I guess I should point out a few of the elephants in the room regarding this movie before we proceed any further, because although this film is marketed and portrayed to be the third film of the Chainsaw Massacre series, it almost plays more as a soft reboot of the first film, because a lot of stuff, not everything, but a lot of stuff, either doesn't add up to the events of the first two films, or seemingly disregards them completely. I mean, yes, on paper, this is part 3 of the series that began with the original Chainsaw and continued with part 2 back in 1986. But let's take a quick look at the film itself. Why is Leatherface even around? He had a chainsaw through his guts at the end of the first sequel. Not to mention he was blown sky high by Drayton's grenade, along with Drayton himself. Yet, here Leatherface is, wearing a leg brace, walking with a slight limp because of it. But other than that, seemingly perfectly fine. We also have Grandpa, this time mummified and long since dead, but physically in the film nonetheless. How the hell did he get here? Who pulled him out of the underground lair? Also, who the hell is this family, and how do they relate to the Sawyers? My answer to all of these questions is this. Chainsaw 3, again, is a soft reboot. Sure, it touches on elements of the first two films, such as the appearance of Stretch and the insignia on the chainsaw itself, the Saw's family, which was uttered by Drayton in Part 2, but beyond that, this film really plays more like a remake of the original story than a direct sequel to Part 2. After putting the armadillo out of its misery, Michelle and Ryan soon find themselves at a rundown gas station and meet a very strange gas station clerk by the name of Alfredo, played in fantastic sleazeball fashion by Tom Everett, who enjoys taking Polaroids of people, who tries and fails to sell Michelle the picture, only to mutter insanely to himself as he proceeds to pump the gas. A man named Tex, played by a very young Viggo Mortensen, chats politely with Michelle before asking for a ride, only to be shot down by an obviously jealous and cautious Ryan. But Tex graciously accepts the rejection. After using the porno-lined restroom, Alfredo and Tex have a very violent altercation once Tex catches the gas station clerk peeping at Michelle through the wall, and this leads to an armed and dangerous Alfredo pointing a shotgun at both the couple and at Tex himself. Tex tells them to drive off, and as they do, they witness Alfredo shoot down the ride-needing cowboy. At least, so they think. Although Alfredo comes off as very quirky and cartoony at first, and the banter between him and Tex seems almost funny at first, once this altercation happens and the situation devolves, it actually feels quite tense, and is executed rather brilliantly as far as building as much tension and unease as possible. I'm aware that a lot of people do not like this film, but you at least have to admire the fact that when things go south in this movie, things really go south, and intense scenes like this truly feel of the moment and they're anxiety-inducing. Soon thereafter, a very gnarled and foreboding-looking pickup truck roars out of the gas station garage, and night falls on the terrified couple, who soon fall afoul of this crazed pickup truck and its driver, assumed to be Alfredo, and the couple are soon run off the road, blowing a tire in the process. As Ryan attempts to replace the tire, Michelle grows more and more paranoid, hearing approaching sounds that are making her extremely uncomfortable. Finally, just as Ryan is finished with the tire, the roar of a chainsaw cuts through the darkness, and Leatherface, illuminated only by flashlight, finally makes his appearance in Chainsaw 3, sporting long, rock and roll hair and one pissed-off attitude. Naturally, the skin-masked madman goes after Ryan and Michelle, who manage to drive off just in the nick of time, leaving behind an even more pissed-off Leatherface. I have to note just how gnarly Leatherface looks in this film. Although it's not my favorite look of the character, not by a long shot, there's definitely some attributes that I think are noteworthy here. First of all, the beige and tan outfit works really well against the Texas desert backdrop color palette of the film. The knee brace does in fact look and sound pretty cool, and the mask, although not my favorite in the franchise, looks very much like fresh, wet skin that was recently cut off someone's face, which it was, as illustrated during the film's opening credit sequence. His teeth are absolutely horrid, and somehow look even worse than his teeth from Part 2. But what really keeps this iteration, visually, from climbing higher on the ladder for me, is the long hair. I don't think the long heavy metal hair really suits Leatherface, and although it complements the film's more heavy metal soundtrack, I think it lessens the potential scary factor of the chainsaw-wielding cannibal. The film shifts into its main course once the characters, upon seeing a bloodied Tex stranded in the middle of the road, swerve to avoid hitting him, only to wind up crashing along with another driver who happens to be in the same area. a survivalist named Benny, played by the legendary badass Ken Faree, who not only helps the couple get out of the car and begins tending their wounds, but also hilariously calls them crazy while hearing their seemingly insane story.
Sounds like he's just a few quarts shy of a full tank, you know what I mean?
Benny soon agrees to help the couple find their friend Tex, who, for whatever reason, was standing bloodied in the middle of the road. On the way, Benny comes across a hook-handed man named Tinker, played by Joe Unger, who offers his assistance by setting down road flares. At this point, Benny is unaware that the truck this weird man is driving is actually the same one that chased down Michelle and Ryan earlier that evening. However, Benny soon realizes Tinker's intentions after he finds a damaged chainsaw in the back of the truck. He flees the scene and abruptly encounters Leatherface after falling down a hill, but is saved by a disheveled woman named Sarah, played by Toni Hudson, who had recently escaped from Leatherface in the clutches of the Sawyers. Benny learns that Sarah's entire family was killed and that the Sawyer family is actually watching the roads. The poor woman is clearly shell-shocked by her experiences, and unknown to Benny, the mask that Leatherface is currently wearing is actually the face of Sarah's sister, Gina, played by Beth DePatie in the opening title sequence. And more gruesome than that, Sarah actually watched her sister's face be turned into the macabre and rose-tattooed face mask. Benny hears Michelle and Ryan calling out for him and leaves Sarah in the woods with every intention on returning to her. But naturally, Leatherface ends up killing her very soon thereafter. Everything really goes to hell when Ryan gets caught in a bear trap, and from the point of view of Michelle, who Ryan insistently tells to keep running, believes her boyfriend to be murdered right then and there. Michelle quickly locates a house and believes to have finally found help, but after she meets a suspiciously creepy little girl, played by Jennifer Banco, carrying a doll with an infant's skull as its head, she knows she's in trouble, and it's at this point that Michelle is captured by Tex, revealed to be one of the Sawyer family members all along, who brings her into the kitchen and introduces her to the already deceased and decomposed grandpa, who apparently at least made it out of the underground lair from part 2 in one piece. Enter Miriam Byrd Nethery as the character of Mama, the no-bullshit matriarch of the Sawyer family, at least this facet of the family, that is. Tinker then drags in the badly injured Ryan, whom he and Tex suspend upside down with a pair of meat hooks. When Leatherface returns home, Tex equips him with a large golden chainsaw with the words, "The Saw's family" engraved on it, built by Tinker. This must have been some kind of Sawyer family motto, or at least one used often enough by Drayton that this faction of the Sawyer clan decided to pay tribute to the late Cook. Regardless, this chainsaw is epic, and I don't care how cheesy it is or how lame some chainsaw fans find it to be, this Cadillac chainsaw is chainsaw perfection, and I wish it would have been used more in the film itself. On his way through the woods, Benny encounters Alfredo, who just so happens to be dumping pieces of his, presumably, ex-girlfriend into the swamp. After a verbal confrontation, Benny knocks him into the dark swamp waters, and that's the last we see of Alfredo, at least for now. As the family prepare for dinner in the kitchen, the little girl is tasked with killing the barely alive Ryan, as Michelle watches. Leatherface prepares to kill Michelle as well, but Benny, here to save the day, has luckily come across the Sawyer homestead as well, and opens fire on the house with an automatic rifle before Michelle could be executed, killing Mama, blowing off Tinker's fingers, and knocking the new chainsaw right from Bubba's hands. Michelle makes her escape and flees into the woods in the midst of all the smoke and confusion, pursued by Leatherface, who seemingly kills Benny by running him over with Tinker's truck. But, as all American badasses tend to do, Benny survives yet again, but immediately comes face to face with a manic Tex. But no worries, Benny ends up lighting the cowboy on fire as the little girl watches from the window. Jesus. The film ends with Benny catching up with Leatherface and Michelle in the middle of the swamps, where Leatherface seemingly kills Benny. At this point, I'm convinced Benny can't die, and Michelle, in a moment of pure badassness, bashes in Leatherface's face with a giant rock and leaves the chainsaw-wielding madman to drown. As dawn breaks, Michelle reaches the main road before Alfredo's pickup truck suddenly appears, driven by a surviving Benny. Dude, this guy is an absolute madman. As Benny helps her into the truck, Alfredo appears and attacks him. God, does anybody in this film actually die ever? At this point, I'm waiting for the damn armadillo to show up. Michelle doesn't hesitate one bit when she gets the drop on Alfredo, shooting the lunatic dead right there in the back of the truck. All is well. Michelle and Benny share a mutual thought.
There's roadkill all over Texas.
Got that right.
And the two drive off into the sunrise, unaware that a surviving Leatherface, somehow I have no idea, walks into frame, angrily revving his chainsaw as yet another final girl gets away. Come to think of it, Leatherface has a really bad track record of not getting the girl. All in all, I really enjoy Chainsaw 3, and whether or not you grew up watching the R-rated or unrated versions of the film, I feel like the movie is enjoyable nonetheless, regardless of which cut you choose. I realize the production on the film was riddled with trouble, and Jeff Burr has only just recently begun to warm up to the film, rather than being devastated by the loss of the film he originally set out to make, which really never got to be made, or at least never had the chance to be properly edited. Probably more of an amalgamation of all of those factors, versus just one or the other. Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre III is a very gritty, angry, and dark film that was really trying to make a mark for itself in this brand new New Line Cinema era of the series at that time. Although this never really took off in the way producers had hoped, for obvious reasons, I think the film has always been very watchable and very enjoyable as a Chainsaw sequel, and it's only aged better with time. All of the actors do a great job, the production design was on point, even though we don't really get to see much of it because of how dark the film is, literally. The editing is punctual, the original score is unforgivingly foreboding, the tone and vibe of the film is cold and ruthless, and it really does work well as a soft reboot of the Sawyer family story, rather than a direct sequel to Chainsaw 2. If you never saw this film, do yourself a solid and see it. You'll probably at least enjoy it on a base level, especially if you're a fan of Leatherface movies. If you haven't seen it in a long time, do yourself the honors of giving it another chance. I think you may just change your mind. Jeff Burr's Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre III, is a scary good time.